if you wake and bake and you feel like all the propaganda that says anything about weed being bad is all bullshit, then you might want to watch this video because we might be very similar.
Because of this, and because I woke up without a hangover, I immediately the next day said, I am now a stoner. Like I declared myself.
Dude, for real.
Fucking, let's go get that shit. We got in the car, we drove to someone's dealer in Monterey, and we bought as much as we could get. And pretty much from that point into my 20s, I smoked every fucking day. Like, I mean, in college, I was wake and bake. And for me, I did it because I was like, well, obviously it's not affecting me. I passed all my classes. I sat there one time and wrote a term paper on the history of like the Christian church or something for a history class in a recliner with a laptop, just smoking 3-foot bong loads while watching the whole Star Wars, you know, like
wow.
at that time, 3, 4, or 4, 5, and 6 or whatever, you know, so I'm watching Star and then turning it in, like crunching it the night and getting a B, you know what I mean? Or getting an A and being like, yeah, weed doesn't affect me.
Weed is great.
Yeah. I didn't really feel like I would see people that you would call stoners or losers who were tired, but here I was like passing my classes, getting up and doing all this like functional stuff, you know? So I thought, what's the harm in it? You know?
Yeah. No, that's so funny. The parallel is exactly like my story because when I was getting into weed, you know, I was already making $115,000 a year.
Yeah.
And I was like 25.
Yeah, I'm successful.
I was like, every fucking person looking at me is like wishing they were making this kind of money.
Yeah.
And I was by myself. So I was further away from family, didn't have a lot of friends. I wish I had more friends around.
Yeah.
So part of it was like I was by myself, and that was one way I found to enjoy was getting high. But then I was still like working pretty hard and found a good way to escape from like the stress that I felt. And I also realized like, okay, if this isn't really doing any harm, then I think I'm just going to continue this habit. And I remember, you know, we're both kind of like this. We're like, we tell everybody if something we find is great.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I was convincing everyone that I knew about how great weed is and how they should all get high with me and we should do this together. And you know, I had a whole array of
community.
Yeah, I wanted to create a whole vibe with me. I bought like the Volcano. I bought like all the fucking products you can imagine. You know,
had the money to buy the good shit.
I had the money to buy the good shit, so I'm buying like the German vaporizers and like you're buying like ounces or half pounds or whatever shit at a time because you're like, oh man, that's some good purple, man. How much can I get a half of that or what? Like how much is this? So always having just a lot on hand. But it was funny because at that time I would have never been convinced out of my mind like I should ever even consider taking a break or stopping weed because I just couldn't see the downsides of it.
Yeah, what's the downside?
Right.
I mean, weed doesn't, at face value, and to me, that's what makes it so deadly. But it's not deadly in that sense. But to me, that's really the hidden thing in it. And we'll get to that in a little bit, is there doesn't appear to be a downside because you're like, how am I not
functioning?
I mean, other than like, maybe I want to munch too much. And some people don't munch, but other people, they want to order that late night pizza or something, but some don't. So you're like, okay, I'm not really seeing, and with the whole war on drugs and everything too, it's just making you, and if you're more counterculture, like we might be, or not just believing the whatever narrative that comes out, you're like, dude, we've been lied to. This stuff is awesome. People use it for cancer. They use it for this. They use it for that. So why can't I just use it, you know? So I ended up smoking, like, I'm talking like wake and bake, dude, all through college.
Yeah.
All in because I was involved in music. Everyone
I mean, it's the same
high.
thing. I was waking up before brushing my teeth next to the sink. I had a dab rig, and I'm taking a dab before brushing my teeth.
You went even
fucked
deeper.
Up, bro.
I would, dab.
Literally taking a dab.
Wake and dab.
Wake and dab. And then Mimi used to come up and visit me every once in a while, like once a month for the weekend.
Like, I can't believe she saw that.
I know,
like,
dude.
Who is this
I'm
loser?
surprised she's still with me. It's a shocker. I would have a Volcano next on the right side of my bed. There'd be times where I'd be waking up in the middle of the night, blowing up a bag, and just smoking weed, and then going back to bed and like waking. Like I had a Volcano always
just
hot,
constant.
like because those devices are desktop, so this always on temperature, ready to take a hit. So I was like. I thought it was a little crazy what I was doing, but at the same time, like we were talking, like you don't see what is the downside of this thing. Like, why would I want to stop?
Well, let me tell you a little downside that happened to me now that you are, it's actually triggering my memory now.
That's good. I'm glad.
Because I'm like, now that you mention it, in college, at the end of college, I had a downturn. And I'm not the kind of person to get depressed. And it's one few times, maybe 3 times in my life, I can say I've actually been depressed. And I got into a depression. And I had graduated college and I was playing music and it wasn't as fulfilling and I was getting high all the time and I just remember I just started getting depressed, man. I didn't know what it was or why I was or what to do. Like I just hit this real crisis in life, you know? And I remember at that time when music wasn't working out, you know, I mean, it was working out, but not paying enough, you know, like I wasn't like at your age making that kind of money. I was making peanuts. So I was like, okay, I'm going to move. This was back on the East Coast, New Jersey, New York area. I moved back to California. And that's when I kind of like got like resaved again. I started going to church, like kind of the origin of where I was at before. And I was like, maybe it's the lifestyle I'm leading, you know? So I was like, went almost back to like weed is bad. Not necessarily that it's bad. Like I never went back to how I thought about it before, but I just had to change my lifestyle. And I remember thinking after smoking every single day, once you make it out of the first 2 weeks to 4 weeks, it's kind of like being sober was a new high. Like, oh my God, like everything seems amazing. Like,
well, you've just spent so much time cloudy. And you finally start
that
to
becomes
see
your
clear
new norm.
It's like your short-term memory is all you have available to you. And if in the last like 4 weeks you've only gotten high, you don't know what the fuck is behind that. You've never, you forget. So it's all you know. And I think what you're saying, it was interesting because the first time I thought I had an issue with weed was I was calling my mom, you know, and she's in the medical field. And I was like, Mom, I don't understand. I'm waking up. I'm really nauseous. And I told my parents that I was smoking weed. They didn't know so much about weed, but they were like, okay, like they understood how stressed out I was. And they were like, okay, if it's helping you, that's fine. Just don't like go overboard. Obviously, they don't know I'm taking dabs before I fucking brush my teeth. That's a different story. But I was telling her and she was like, you know, there's been a bunch of cases coming into the hospital of teenagers and young adults who come in because they have nausea and they're vomiting and they do all the full panel tests on them and they don't find anything is wrong. Weed, and then they'll say, well, what is the issue? And a lot of them, those kids are not telling the doctor that they're smoking weed also. And it turned out it's CHS, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which is a toxicity that develops in your system from too much weed.
You're just building it up.
And I was like, oh, fuck. Maybe I got to slow down. Like that was my first indication of like
just something.
Hitting some effect where you're just like, okay, I think I need to slow this down. And then you started to, because I moved from starting with solvents and like the dabs to first realizing that's way too expensive, right? To go into like, okay, what's the alternative? Okay, flour, and then you're rolling joints and blunts. You're like, that's too much weed being used to get high. To then finally go into the drier vaporizer stuff, like with the Volcano and the Mighty, because it's a small amount, and it's basically like taking the plant in its raw form and vaporizing. And that was like the conclusion of like, okay, this is the best way to do this if I'm going to continue this habit. And I think almost like 3 years into, or let's say 2.5 years into doing like weed every single day, I was getting to a point where I wasn't working out like I was before. I was just every time after work or whatever, I just want to get high and like enjoy myself. And so my habits started to shift. So it's more smoking habits, less active habits.
But let me just interrupt you one second because I want whoever's ever going to watch this to realize we're talking about this years like it was, we're talking about it quickly.
We're talking about it fast.
But when we're talking about a habit shift, that's the sneaky shit about weed, is the shifts come like very slowly. You know what I'm saying? If you want to go take fentanyl, it's like, you know what I mean? If you even get up again, you know what I'm saying? Or some kind of heavy ass drug.
It takes years to notice anything.
That's what makes it so fucking sneaky is you get in there and you start smoking and you feel great. And it's like a long-term loft. Like, and I know people who have gone 40 years long-term loft, and they don't even realize how low they've gone in terms of like, maybe you still go to the gym, but you don't lift as hard. Or it's just a very slow thing.
Your complacency level goes higher and you don't see a problem with it.
So I just want people to know when we're talking about these shifts, these are not quick shifts like you just wake up one day. I mean, you woke up one day nauseous, but it's not a quick shift in the sense of your daily lifestyle habit, and even more so your energetic level and your ability to just be perceptive and aware what's going on inside yourself and others. That's all being muted, you know? Like you're getting, your perception is being muted. I don't want to say dumbed down because sometimes you actually have better auditory perception.